I feel like health systems in Canada versus the US are very different. Excuse me. Finding a new neurologist when you moved, how was that? Is that a challenge? Was it just about calling around and being like, hi, I want to be your patient? Or how does that work for you?
It was definitely a challenge and one
Okay.
of my biggest fears and factors actually for moving to this location
Yeah.
because I need a MS specialist neurologist as well as a movement disorder neurologist to manage the dystonia spasms that I have because of my MS, where I get like a Botox type injection in my feet
Okay.
and calves quarterly.
Okay.
So I wanted to move somewhere that had comparable level of care, like hospitals, and I didn't want to be far from them. So I essentially just did some research on the best MS specialists and centers across the country, and Duke University, which is here in Durham, Raleigh, Durham area, is one of the best. And so I asked my current neurologist and bought at the time, my current neurologist, plural, because I, collect them like Monopoly pieces. I asked them for advice and I asked them if they had thoughts and things and about it. And they were like, yes, a lot of, people have moved down there. Like, this will be great for you. And one of them was like, oh, you'd really like this area in North Carolina, but there are no movement disorder neurologists within a reasonable level. So you can't move there. And I'm like, okay, good to know. Thanks. So then it was just a matter of calling in and making a new patient appointment and seeing the new team. And thankfully, well, my records should have been available to them online. That technically we have a digital system and a lot of the major hospitals in America are connected on this system. Are mine from my hospital where I've had my primary treatment available to them? No, of course not. Why?
Okay.
We don't know. Some of the others where I've had like other assessments and second opinions in Boston hospitals are available to them.
Right.
They have those records, but they don't have my most detailed records from the hospital I was at for the last decade.
Right.
For no reason, we don't know. So I've called and had to have them fax it, and there was at one point I was printing notes from my movement disorder neurologist off of the nurse's station's computer for my own like online patient site. Being your own best advocate, I'm like, this is what I need. Here we go. And who can help me? Just sign me up, right? And also I did have to consult with my insurance and make sure that they would be within network because not everyone's insurance has this, but my insurance through my ex is one where you have in network versus out of network. So if they're out of your network, it costs exorbitantly more. Okay. So I wanted to be in network also, which was something I had to find before I actually committed to moving. That was very important to me. Otherwise, this cost savings of moving somewhere that's less cost of living would have been way outweighed by the cost of not having a doctor that was in my network, right? So, those things that you have to balance.
Exactly. So I know that you're involved a lot you do a lot of public speaking about MS, chronic illness, advocacy. Can you just tell me a little bit about some of that you're involved in, if you don't mind?
Sure, absolutely. For me, speaking up in public speaking and volunteering with the MS Society here in the United States has been very empowering. And it's been in a very empowering way for me to take back what I felt was a very disempowering diagnosis. I felt very disempowered by my disease diagnosis with MS. And I guess, taking back my power has really been what I would call it. That's my speaking up. And I feel very passionate about it. And I'm so grateful that I have the ability and the capabilities to do it because I've met some of the very best people from it. And I feel like I have friends all over the world now
Yes.
because all of my friends live in my phone, right?
Yes.
And I had friends in North Carolina before moving here because of my chronic illness, even though we hadn't met in person yet.
Yes.
We're still friends. Like I was like, well, I know people. Of course I know people.
Yeah.
They're great. And I've met even more, people, and we bond over our chronic illnesses, whether they're MS or something else. We just tend to flock together, I
Mhm.
guess. But it's that level of someone who gets it
Yeah.
without having to actually get it, because you don't really want anyone else to actually.
Right.
So for me, it's been a very empowering experience,
Mhm.
and I'm very grateful to have been able to work and volunteer with the society and tell
Mhm.
my story and help to reform some of
Mhm.
these really, really, really not patient focused policies that we have in the US medical care systems.
Mhm.
We do not put patients first. The system is not designed to put patients first. It is certainly not designed to help people with chronic illness or disability, and even more so, not designed to help people with chronic illness, disability, and other marginalized factors. If you were LGBTQ plus, if you were Black, Indigenous, person of color, your experience is far more disempowering than mine has been,
Yes.
and it is my biggest frustration.
Yeah.
Because I want to, just burn the whole system down and change it, but I won't, because I recognize that is anarchy or something,
Yep.
frowned upon. So I work to make small progress and
Mhm.
to, maybe help change someone's views and tell them, that, oh, well, I have MS. That's why I'm using my cane today. The new neighbor's like, hey, did you hurt yourself? Are you okay? No, I just have MS. Like, this is just, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, it's fine. Like, don't worry. They're like, but you don't look sick. And I'm like, well, it's an invisible disability.
Yeah.
So even like on a very small level, from just feeling comfortable to say that now, to a very large level of launching a YouTube series
Mhm.
with the help of the Healthy Voices Impact Fund
Mhm.
to discuss public speaking for patient advocacy, which the link to that is in my Instagram bio, and the videos will be up shortly.
People aren't used to seeing, um, younger people, I'll say younger, wherever you and I fit into that in general thing. I think it depends on the day how young I feel or not,
Yes.
with a mobility device.
Hmm.
Everyone expects you only get sick when you're old.
Right.
So when people see
Exactly.
someone out, they're like, "Oh, she must have broke her leg.
Right.
She must have sprained her ankle." So, like, I think they're, like, taken aback almost for like, "No, actually, that's not the case."
Hmm.
So, I think that needs to be changed. Like, you can get sick any time in your life with a chronic illness.
Right. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't take a big
Yeah,
risk and go skiing and break
yeah,
my ankle, like, because I was trying to do a flip on the
yeah.
mountain. I mean, I used to ski when I was younger. I can't say that, I thankfully never broke
Yeah,
anything like from doing that. But no, this wasn't something I caused. I
right.
couldn't have prevented it. I couldn't have predicted it. Although, there's obviously new studies
Yeah.
more and more now. Um, that have some factors, but I mean, I didn't even know really anyone that had MS, and then of course I shared, and then I found out that I knew a lot of people that
Mhm.
had MS, or
Yes.
people who knew people or loved people or things like that. I have a second cousin who has
Mhm.
MS, but
Yeah,
I've never met them because she lives in another state,
yeah,
and she's actually been in a nursing home for years now, but she was diagnosed far before we had any types of treatment,
right.
or disease modifying therapies, right? So because there was no cure. So
Right.
being 31 and actually being the fittest, quote unquote, like the lightest weight of my life, like exercising the most and like in physically good shape when I was diagnosed, was so ironic
Mhm.
and so frustrating, because people kept telling me how great I looked,
Yep.
and I literally never felt worse in my life.
Mhm. Yep, yep.
And I was like, yeah, thanks, thanks, thanks. And I kind of just, uh, you know, I didn't know what to say. I wasn't like as outspoken about it as I am now. I didn't have a diagnosis yet. Even when I uh, fell trying to sit on my couch because I didn't understand MS fatigue and
Right.
the need to stop, which was only a few months after my diagnosis. And then I herniated the bulging disc in my back and needed to end up having back surgery the following September. So a few months later, after trying to go without it and avoid it. I was like the thinnest I'd ever been, but I was using well, I'd actually was using my 98-year-old grandfather's extra walker
Mhm.
because I couldn't walk from my couch to my bathroom
Right.
or stand or do things like I physically just I was in so much pain.
Mhm.
And while the surgery didn't really fix a lot of the pain, it at least prevented me from having a foot drop, which
Right.
also runs in my family. So
Okay.
degenerative disc disease runs in my family. That one at least I knew about,
Right.
but I didn't know anyone that had MS, and I
Yeah.
was definitely felt way too young to be chronically ill or whatever. I was like, oh no, no, this isn't going to be a thing. This is going to be fine.
Right, and I kind of found it difficult for a while because no one around my age that I knew had it. Although
Mhm.
I went to, like, a peer support group for it, everyone was old enough to be, like, my parent or grandparent.
Mhm.
So it wasn't until probably 4 to 5 years ago that I met someone within my age group, and I'm like, "Oh, hello, let's be friends."
Right?
So it just 'cause it they understand a little bit better because 'cause you're, like, kind of in the same stages of life.
Exactly.
So, that's another thing that I find as well, and, social media has definitely helped that because it just you can just be in contact with so many people, which is great.
Yes, and the social media community for me was a lifesaver,
Yeah,
especially in the beginning.
yeah,
I'm so grateful that I
mhm,
have that I had access to it, and it's made a huge difference for me.
right, yeah, that's for sure. As far as MS symptoms go, what do you deal with on a regular basis? Like,
What
daily?
don't I deal with on a regular
Okay,
basis?
that's fair.
No, chronic fatigue,
Mhm,
chronic pain, chronic muscle spasms, the dystonia I have in my calf and feet, focal dystonia.
mhm,
Dystonia is also its own disease. It's also very common in Parkinson's, but mine has been caused by my MS, or
mhm,
so we think,
yeah,
for the test. Um, so my feet kind of move constantly, even though I do get the injections quarterly. They never actually stop, and so that causes increased fatigue and increased muscle pain. And obviously, because I did mention I had back pain and back
mhm,
issues already, so it highlights the back pain. MS has been known to cause widespread pain, which I also have. I get spasms sometimes in my right shoulder, brain fog, cog fog, whatever you want to call it. I definitely deal with that. I've also been diagnosed with IBS, whether or not that's really just my MS and the medications
yeah,
or whatever. There hasn't been a food that triggers me, or anything like that, for IBS, but you know, bit of trial and error there as well. There's a lot of tests, and they just kind of are like, well, you have a lot of things wrong with you.
yeah,
So yeah, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, heat intolerance also, which is a really rude one.
yeah,
Um, I don't recommend any of them. I have had bladder and bowel
mhm,
issues as well, especially when my symptoms flare up. My
mhm,
bladder frequency and urgency is very obnoxious,
yes.
like as if I'd had 4 children or something. And my mom compares it, and I'm like, well, yes, but you're over 65 and have had children, and I'm 30 something and have not.
Yeah,
So, yeah, so I'm like, yeah, great. This is great. It's
mhm,
lovely. But it's like all those things you don't want to really like admit on the internet, like that's not sexy, but it's true. It happens.
exactly.
And I have struggled to walk. I mean, since
Mhm,
this last flare up, especially, I've done a lot of physical therapy and strength training and balance work to be able to walk through the fact that I have these muscle spasms. I do often use my cane around the time I need my injections just for kind of the balance.
okay,
Um, but otherwise I will use my cane like when my left leg specifically is very heavy and not working with the right leg.
Yeah.
Or I put my groceries or packages or things like in a cart, like, like I call it like my grandma cart. And I can kind of like push on that in my apartment complex, or at the store or something. So I do use that. But yeah, for a lot of it just kind of depends on the day. But those things for me never go away. They're constant symptoms. And I think, it's a great question, because people think of relapse remitting MS where you're in remission and you're not currently facing symptoms. But oh, I am. I am.
And you don't I feel like you go into it with the diagnosis of remitting relapsing, which I also have, and you're like, "Oh, well, I'll have this, and then it completely goes back to normal, and I'll be perfectly fine." Yeah, right. Because they're like,
That was
"Oh,
my thought exactly. I was like, "Oh, yep, I'm in remission now. All right, I'm good." I'm like, "Yeah, it's cool. I can do all these things." And I literally fell trying to sit on my own couch, and that's when my disc herniated. And my doctors even were still like, "You had to have done something else." And I'm like, "Nope, nope, that's really what happened." And I was just, it wasn't late. It was probably 6 p.m.
yeah,
I didn't have any idea how to pace myself or listen to my body or read the cues.
mhm,
And I didn't have any anti-fatigue medication
right,
or anything like that. So yeah, no, I just totally fell on the hardwood, and yeah, that led to me needing back surgery because I didn't listen to myself.
yeah, yeah,
Learned that the hard way. I've learned it the hard way quite a few times.
yeah,
I am a person that needs to learn things the hard way a few times. I wish I wasn't, but I am.
yeah. I find it hard, like, I've been dealing with chronic fatigue for years, but it's like some days I still haven't learned. I'm like, "Oh, I'll do this and this and this and all of these things," and then I pay for it for days, and I'm like, "You would think that I would know by now."
And I think we do know, but sometimes it seems like we just don't want to,
Yeah.
right? Or at least that's for me, because I do know, logically, I do know that there's tax. Like I call it the MS
Oh,
tax.
yeah.
I will have a great weekend and a lot of fun, and then I'll
Mhm,
have to pay the tax,
mhm.
where I have to prepare like by resting
Right.
and taking it easy. And then maybe a few days later, I can do something, and then I'll still pay the tax.
Yeah.
But I don't even have self-care routines as much as self-maintenance routines, with
Yeah.
stretching and
Yep.
self-massage and
Mhm.
also massage, and um, you know, just all the things that people think of, like an Epsom salt bath. Like, no, it's literally part of how I continue to walk.
Right.
Like my massage torture is what I call it, is how I continue to stay upright, because there are so many knots in my muscles from the constant spasms, and
Yeah.
the compensating, and the stress and the pain.
Yeah.
And the life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's not that we don't learn, it's just that we desire it to be different.
Right. Exactly. And it's like, don't be stressed. Stress is bad for MS. Well, like, the MS brings the stress. Like,
Right?
I'm like, how do you like, what's
Right.
like, how do I balance this? Like,
I've been, speaking of changing, we were talking about me changing doctors, and I've been working to schedule my infusion in my new location,
mhm,
and it should have been scheduled already. Like, it needs to be like next week. And there was some delay in the doctor's office side, and they're delayed because it's the new year and people are switching insurances and things. And I spent hours of my life dealing with this, and
mhm.
it's so stressful for me, because I do know that last year my therapy was delayed, and then I had a terrible flare up, and so that gives me some anxiety, obviously.
Understand.
um, and I'm like, I'm very nice, but I'm like, I'm spending hours of my life working on this, being my own best advocate. It's exhausting.
Yes.
Like, we, the ones living with chronic illness, shouldn't have to be the ones advocating for change. Azure Antoinette said something like that far more eloquently than I did at the Healthy Voices conference in September
Mhm,
of 2022, far more eloquent than I did. But that's really stuck with me. Like,
mhm.
we shouldn't be the ones advocating for the change.
Right.
We are, because we have to be.
Yes.
Because this is life or death for us. It's
Mhm.
quality of life, and that for me, that there's nothing more important than being able to live my life
Mhm.
and stay as healthy as possible and enjoy what I have and live it fully, even with limits.
Yes, exactly, exactly. What would you tell someone today who is diagnosed with MS?
I tell them it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be okay.
Mhm.
And your life will probably look a lot different than you've imagined it to be, but that different doesn't have to be worse.
Mhm.
Um, I would never have imagined my life looking like this 7 years ago or even 5 years ago, truthfully.
Mhm.
Um, and I, in many ways, love it. And I'm so grateful for it. And I'm so grateful for some of the experiences that I've had
Yes.
because of my MS and
Mhm.
some of the people that I've met because of my MS. And a lot of times I think I wouldn't trade that for the world.
Mhm.
Do I recommend getting MS? No. Do I want to give it back? Yes. But I tell them that it's going to be okay and that they are the ones that are in charge of their health care and that they need to, you know, do what they can to support themselves and their own health and become their own best advocate and speak up for themselves and make
Mhm.
sure that they feel comfortable with their doctor. If they have the privilege of being able to find a MS specialist, I recommend that versus just a general neurologist. If they have the privilege of being able to even find a different MS specialist, if they don't connect with theirs or they don't feel like they're being heard or taken
Yeah.
seriously, if they feel gaslit by their doctors, it's not all in your head. I mean, it is because I have an MRI and I love
Yeah.
to make bad humor jokes. I
Yeah.
mean, that's how I cope. I like to laugh instead of cry. I mean, sometimes I cry, but
Yeah.
it's okay. You are in charge and you are the expert in your own body. And even though your body may feel like a completely foreign object to you right now, you'll figure that out
Mhm.
again. And it's gonna be okay. And I'd also recommend that they talk to someone, a counselor, a therapist, a pastor, a family friend, something like that, and
Yes.
start, journaling and doing some mental health care and mental health work because I know there are statistics of anxiety and depression affecting like 70% of people living with MS. I personally had depression, dealt with depression before my MS diagnosis. I've had major depressive disorder for years now. So that is still a symptom I deal with every day. And now I do have anxiety since my MS diagnosis and all the world, the things, right?
Yeah.
The medical trauma and gaslighting and things, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times we focus on the physical health when you get a physical health diagnosis, right? And that's important. But the mental health is also an invisible illness and a very critical part of
Yeah.
living a great life with your illness, whatever that is. I think whoever you're comfortable talking to about it, that I cannot recommend that enough. And I recognize that I wasn't even in the right space for the first entire year of my diagnosis to even benefit from that therapy at the time. But in hindsight, I can see how much I had benefited
Mhm.
and, and continued, therapy and
Right.
things like that.
Right. Is there anything else that you would like to add? I think those are all my questions that I have for you. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you
Um,
so much for all of the
yeah,
work
thank
that
you
you
so
do. I
much.
hope you realize how much it makes me feel less alone, how much I enjoy it personally. It's really just been an honor and a pleasure. I appreciate it so much, Candice. I really, you know, we shouldn't have to be the ones doing this, but
That's right, I agree.
we are. And knowing that, we aren't alone in that and that makes a huge difference. So thank you. Thank you. That's really what I want to say.